My name is Richard Ferrer, and I can say I am cloud hired.
That yes, come and join and get cloud hired. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
Hey, Go Cloud Architect family. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired, guys.
So I'll just say I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired thanks to Go Cloud Architects.
It worked for me, and now I'm cloud hired.
Because of Go Cloud Architect program, I am cloud hired. See!
I am cloud hired. Thank you, Mike and the Go Cloud team.
Welcome, everyone. Today, we are here to talk about winning your cloud architect interview or your enterprise architect interview or your solutions architect interview, or honestly, any technical interview that you're going to be involved or interview process, especially for business-oriented roles like architecture. And we'll talk about the kinds of interviews. We're going to talk about the things that hiring managers want to actually hear. We're going to talk about the meaning behind the questions we ask and why we ask these questions. And the reason Alonzo and I are going to talk about that with you is as follows. We want you to understand the way hiring managers think, and we want you to understand what hiring managers want. Because if you know what hiring managers think and hiring managers want, you know how to position yourself to the hiring manager. Imagine trying to sell a product. And for example, someone actually gave me a bad example of sales today. A person literally sent me an email and that said, I could make it that you'd never speak to your clients again with AI. And I said, no, thank you. I love speaking to my clients. In fact, I go to YouTube several times a week just to talk to the community for free because I like helping people. No, I like to deliver good service. And that's not a use case that I wanted. I use AI in all kinds of use cases, but the point is it's using it for the right reason. But they're looking to see that. They want to see what you hear. They want to see what you think. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And Alonzo will be here with me only for the first hour because he's committed to another architecture meeting a little bit after that. But Alonzo is a great source of knowledge to talk about these things too. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, we've got a free guide on how to win the interview in the description of this video. Alonzo and I spent a whole lot of time on that. Chris also did, and he's got an HR background, so it's completely free. I hope you join it. And in the description of this video, we've got a lot of free things, free webinars to get you to your goals, and many free resources to help you with the skills you can use to earn more and build your career. Alonzo, you want to say hello to everybody after you're done your cough? Sorry about that. Didn't see that.
Yeah, that was very untimely. Hello, everyone. I hope you all have had an amazing week like we had. It's always great to be a part of this show, be a part of all the things that we do at Go Cloud Careers and how we help people from all over the globe realize their cloud architect dreams. One of the things that I want to impart to you is that we've had an amazing year helping other people become their best cloud architect selves. And this is going to be our end of year push for us to have more students and realize their dreams. By doing so, we're going to have 50% off all of our development programs. This is going to be the start of our last push of the year to make sure that you get the savings you want, just like you've asked, in an environment that will be conducive to your success. So we encourage everyone to take advantage of that, 50% off today, and then we'll see what happens next week.
Absolutely. So we got a lot of ground to cover because I want to make sure you're successful in your next cloud architect interview, enterprise architect interview, solutions architect interview, AWS Solutions Architect interview, or any interview where it's going to combine business and technical skills. So there's several kinds of interviews that we actually do as hiring managers, and we're going to talk about what the goal is in each interview, and then we'll talk about the kinds of questions we would also ask architects specifically. So the first interview, typically speaking, is something called the screener interview. And here I'm going to call Alonzo on the phone. I'll demonstrate a quick screening interview. Hi, Alonzo. How are you? I've received your resume, and I thought I would like to talk to you.
Pleasure to meet you, Mike. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, Alonzo, on your resume, it looks like you have a lot of knowledge in AI. Is AI architecture what you do? Because I also see you've got a lot of knowledge in cloud, too.
Actually, cloud architecture is my foundational understanding of the topic, but my focus is generative AI, and I'm happy to share any of that information with you today.
Where are you looking to go in your career, Alonzo?
Ultimately, I would like to continue to utilize cloud architecture concepts, frameworks, and industry knowledge, along with generative AI, to push my career into higher heights for business value for this organization. So that could be in the form of a principal AI architect or whatever the needs of the business may have.
Are you actively looking to make a change now or sometime near now?
I am actively looking to make a change, but my focus is always going to be on maximizing the business value for the organization I choose to work for and ensuring that is going to be in alignment with my career goals as well as the goals of the organization.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to cut it there. That's a screener interview. Now, there could potentially be a simple technical question here, but it's a screener interview. What was I trying to determine here? One is, who is Alonzo? Oh, how does he see himself? Do I trust him on the surface? Do I like him on the surface? I like what Alonzo told me. I get the fact that he's focused. I hear that. He knows what he wants, and he's concerned about making a difference. I want to talk to this person. That's the whole point of a screener interview. That's it. So it could come from HR. It could come from the hiring manager itself, depending where you went. And if you went through a recruiter, it's going to probably be from the hiring manager themselves. If you went in through an HR internal person, it could be either the HR person or the hiring manager. They're trying to see if they should spend 15 to 30 minutes actually with you on an interview. Now, the next kind of interview, and honestly, this is going to be frustrating, but it's also reality. It's called the courtesy interview. And there's two versions of the courtesy interview. In the courtesy interview, it could be the situation where the company's decided to hire another person. And they already picked out who they're going to hire. But what ultimately has to happen is they have to interview 3 external candidates before they can actually make a decision. Now, truthfully, at one point in my career, I actually went on what I didn't know was a courtesy interview with a major networking company. And as it turned out, I did so well on that courtesy interview, and I ended up getting an offer the next day that they actually made me the offer. And I found out about it after the fact because there was someone that was frustrated that they didn't get a job that was going to be promised to them. The other person was great, good friend of mine, and we got him to a better job anyway. But the point is that was a courtesy interview. And that can happen. So sometimes you go on an interview and it just feels too nice, too comfortable and polite. It's because they've already made a decision to hire somebody, but if they're doing an interview anyway, because it's a company policy to interview external people. Here's the next kind of courtesy interview. The next kind of courtesy interview is you interview the person, you ask them a question, and it's directly on something on their resume. They can't answer it. You dive a little deeper to try and figure out something on the resume, and they can't answer it. And at that point, you can't hire the person, but it sounds really mean to say, get out now. So what companies do is they say, okay, so let's chat a little bit. What are your interests in life? What are your hobbies? What is it you're looking to do? Because they're trying to buy time for 10 to 15 minutes of polite conversation to leave a good taste in your mouth before they escort you out of the door. I can tell you how I learned about courtesy interviews. I learned first, being a manager, realizing why you have to sometimes interview external people, because what if you get better? And that's why there's companies mandated. But early in my career, I interviewed someone. The person had the most beautiful resume I've ever seen. I mean, it was amazing. It looked like something you would actually see on a Russ White, but this wasn't Russ White, who could do it all. So I saw a resume like this. I interviewed the person, and I picked the thing that they highlighted, which was the most complicated thing in networking, and I asked them a question. They didn't even know what they didn't know about the topic. So I said, okay, what do you know? And instead of telling me what they knew, they pointed me to something they thought I wanted me to know. And I asked them about it, and they didn't even know anything about it. So I literally, it was 3 minutes into the interview. I went up, I said, could you come with me? And I said, walk with me. And I walked him to the door. I said, no, thank you so much. It was nice to meet you. And my manager said, what happened in that interview? It was early in my tech career, 25 years, because we went at a little less emotional intelligence. And I said to my manager, I said, the guy lied to me twice. He doesn't know anything that's on his resume. We can't hire him. And my manager said, of course we can't hire him, Mike. But you didn't have to like escort him out of the room and make him feel like a criminal for lying to you. He says, Mike, what you really need to do is talk to the person, be courteous for about 12 more minutes, and then send them home and make them feel good about themselves. And then we'll just tell them to come back when they have more experience. Meaning it's not the experience they lack, but if they can't do the job, we'll tell them they need more experience, and they're going to feel good about themselves. So that is the second kind of an interview that you may face. And sadly, both are actually real. Now, the next kind of interview that you really should understand is it's going to be a system design interview. And what does this mean? It could be one of many types. One is I may ask you to come up to I may ask you a question. How would you do this? So I've got a client. They have mission critical security. They've got $10 billion of assets they're trying to protect. How would you design their demilitarized zone for a web-facing application? Because at that point, I need the person to understand the difference between a demilitarized zone versus the zones inside of your building, knowing what kind of levels of protection you would use in a demilitarized zone, knowing what kind of hardening somebody would have to do on operating systems, knowing what kind of IAM systems could be using, how many layers of firewalls, IDS, IPS systems. I'm really looking for that. So if I ask them a question and I ask them to whiteboard it, it's going to prove to me instantly that person know architecture, which needs how to design systems, or does that person know how to configure systems, which obviously won't get them the role. And that's a quick separator. So we do a lot of that. All other questions I would ask people and say, okay, compare and contrast the storage that I get in a server in my data center versus block storage in a cloud computing environment. Tell me where the performance differences are, what I might need to do to mitigate any differences or weaknesses in the performance that I get in my data center versus the cloud. Because I need people to know that block storage is not fast. It's actually fairly slow. And I can get, 19 million IOPS in a RAID card in a server, but the fastest I'm going to get in the cloud is 250,000 IOPS, which is 80 times slower. And if the person doesn't know that, and they don't know that the system could be getting much higher performance in the data center, and then they stick it to the cloud, they're going to have disk performance issues, and you're going to see a lot of those sluggish cloud computing systems we have, because it's sluggish storage or sluggish networking or other things. It also makes me know that person, if they don't know the difference in speed, they don't know how to design for the system. And then I start thinking, well, okay, if block storage is slow, what do we do about it? We could go RAID 0, right? But is RAID 0 too risky? Should we go RAID 10? And all those things need to be there. So these kind of things go into system design. We're not asking if you know how to configure something. Quite frankly, I don't care. I care that you know what it's going to be and where it's going to fit and where it's going to go together. I may also ask other questions and say, we have these two competing technologies. Here's the actual challenge that we have. Could you compare and contrast each technology and how it would be a fit for this situation? What are the trade-offs that you would consider along the way? Because in architecture, there's no best technology. You can't recommend something without knowing it. It's all about evaluating the business, their business processes, etc., and figuring out what kind of people, processes, and technology are going to get them to their goals. So those are typical system design interviews. And what we're looking here is the fact that you understand the tech, but you can also apply the tech to the business. So that's like your architecture system design kind of interview. And then there's the behavioral question part of your interview. And why am I asking this? If I ask Alonzo, and I don't need him to answer it right, but let's say I ask Alonzo, tell me about a time you had a challenge and what you did about it. What am I actually asking him? What am I trying to find out? So I don't necessarily believe in the theory behind behavioral questions, but I'm going to tell you what that theory is so you know how to answer these questions. The theory is what you did yesterday, any mistakes that you would do, you're going to repeat them exactly in the future. Now, this is preposterous. It's ridiculous. The whole point of education is to learn how to change our behavior. The whole point of any kind of changing is to change your behavior. You know, a normal person, if something comes at them, a stick flying, you know, or something's at them, they get hit. But maybe if they're martial arts, they just know to automatically react and block something and move their body because it's a trained set of behavior, and anything can be trained. How we respond in fear, how we respond in an emergency, and how we respond when we're frustrated. People that have a hot temper can learn how to manage that and not have a hot temper in the future. So that's the point of the behavioral questions. They want to know how you solve problems, how you behave because it's indicative of your future, and how you'll fit in on the team. So if I'm asking, Alonzo, tell me about a time where you had a disagreement with your manager and what you did about it, I'm trying to find out the process. Was Alonzo the kind of person that had a private discussion with their manager, went out to dinner with their manager, was able to rebuild their relationship and have a frank person-to-person conversation, get to the heart of the matter and solve it? Did Alonzo just defy the manager and go over the manager's head? Maybe that's not somebody who wants. So these are the kind of things that can hurt. Or did Alonzo just ignore the manager and do whatever the heck he felt like? And what happened as a result of that? So there's many iterations that you could look for. But I'm trying to find out, you know, who's Alonzo? What's he think? And is that what's going to be needed from me? I also am trying to see the same thing, cultural fit. Now, if you know Alonzo and I, we could probably get together and go to the beach and talk for 14 hours and not even realize it passed. We're very similar. So, yeah, great behavioral fit for me. But we have to also check, was it a fit for your team? Unless for the person that's working directly with you. So, again, you have to check that. And that means if you've got a philosophy that doesn't work with other people of a similar philosophy, you're not a fit. And it could be anything. And here's what you're trying not to do. I'm the Energizer Bunny. Alonzo knows it. My team actually tries to slow me down so I don't do crazy stuff for my health. If I'm the Energizer Bunny and somebody else is the slow, methodical type, am I going to have any tolerance for the slow, methodical type if I'm the Energizer Bunny? I want the fast, methodical type. So you've got to look and see if the people will fit in, and will they fit in your team? Because, you know, Alonzo's going to come, and I know Alonzo. He'll make any team better. People like him. He's going to break up things. It's going to be great. But that's kind of what I'm looking for. But I'm also looking for someone that's not going to cause disharmony in my team. And we'll get to some examples at some point soon, too. So the next part is we have to check your business acumen on the interview. Because if you're an architect, you're going to be designing a system that would improve business performance. So if you don't know business, you're not going to be in a position to ever help your clients. So they have to give you a business acumen kind of question. Alonzo, you got any examples of business acumen questions?
Absolutely. One thing that comes to mind is understanding how companies utilize or pay for services, cloud. So I would wonder, Mike, what concerning an organization's weighted average cost of capital, how does that help them determine if they're going to purchase a public or a private cloud?
Great question, Alonzo. And I love that because you're actually asking several things. The first thing you want to understand is, do I understand business? And do I have any sense of business acumen? I probably wouldn't answer that on there. But what he's trying to find out here is, do I understand how organizations pay for things? So if you were just AWS certified, for example, you would believe that you either have to buy the data center outright, meaning write a giant check for it, or else you just pay as you go. But that's not reality. An organization can rent the equipment, which makes it OpEx, just like being on the cloud. The organization could finance that equipment and make it capital. So the question actually becomes is we have to evaluate all factors. So if we look at an organization's weighted average cost of capital, and we were looking to say buy the equipment on, say, a 4-year payment plan, we could look at the price of the equipment and the price of the payment plan. And I'll give you an example. Right now, for about $300,000, we can buy a server from Dell that'll cost about $5 or $6 million over 4 years to actually run on the AWS cloud, all things considered. So it's not that do I have to come up with the $300,000 today? No. I have two options. One option is that I can finance it and pay $60,000 a year. Compare that to $60,000 a year for payments on that server. Compare that to $1.5 million on a public cloud. And if we wanted to lease the payment, where what we would do with leasing is we'd turn it into an operational expense. We would take the purchase price minus what the product is worth in, say, 4 years from now or 3 years from now, and all we do is pay the depreciation. Now that means we would have a lower price. So, for example, if it's about $60,000 or $70,000 a year, but without organization's cost of capital to actually pay a payment to buy it, maybe we drop it an additional $10,000 per year. And that's still going to be cheaper than we'd be getting on the cloud in that environment. But we have to look at an organization's capital structure. We have to look at an organization's free cash flow. We have to look at that organization's cash on hand and determine what makes sense for them. And of course, we also have to look at the accounting practices to see where depreciation and or write-offs from operational expenditures would make sense. Did I satisfy your business acumen knowledge there, Alonzo?
Absolutely, Mike.
So the reason we need that is I don't want somebody coming in, oh, the cloud's cheap. You don't have to buy anything. We don't necessarily have to buy it in the data center either. So we have to be able to account for all costs. Sometimes the cloud's cheaper with sporadic applications and a lot of agility. It's beautiful. Sometimes the cloud is 3 to 10 times more expensive. But in all cases, the cloud is more agile. And paying for agility may make sense too. Now, if we need performance, it might be a different situation. So that's where we need to think about all things holistically. So the next one, kind of cloud architect, solution architect, enterprise architect interview are going to be the presentation and the take-home interviews. So depending upon who you are, once you reach the stage that I'm getting close to hiring you, after we pass many of these other kind of interviews along the way, I'm going to give you something to do. I might give you a case study, and I may say, take this case study home. You have 1 or 2 days to respond to this case study, create an architecture, and be back here to present it to a panel of people. And what they're doing with that presentation interview is as follows. They want to see first, can you solve the technical challenge? Can you deliver a presentation to technical professionals and care what they care about, business people and get to what they care about, and executives and get to what the executives care about? And can you win them over? Can you be persuasive? Can you communicate well and present effectively? And you show how it'll help win the business side. Now, I got to tell you, this is typically where your best technical people fail. Your engineers that have a lot of technical experience that have focused on the tech. Now, they learn how to do presentations, and they are awesome, and they give killer presentations with the presentation training. But it all comes from this part, this presentation part. This is the difference between get hired and not get hired. This is the difference between a $200,000 offer and a $300,000 offer, because if your presentation can show you can sell and your presentation shows you know business, you'll be able to bring in a lot more revenue to the organization you work for, which makes you worth much more to them. And you'll be able to get the clients to do what you recommend so they can do things that are good for them in their best interest, which typically gets you case studies and I work with this client and look at what we've achieved together. And those are the kind of things that we're looking to do. Now, after you give that presentation, then we're typically going to do in this presentation, we're going to try to pick you apart. And we're going to ask you really challenging questions. And we may be trying to get you stressed out. For example, at a large networking company, one of the biggest in the world, when they asked me to give a presentation, the sales engineers actually started a fight in the middle of the presentation. They were yelling and screaming at each other to see if I had the ability to take charge, calm it down, and then get everybody happy. So that's what I did. They started a fake fight. I diffused the situation. They said, interview over, Mike. We just wanted to see how you would handle under stress and how you would deal with conflict. Okay. So that's the kind of stuff we're looking for these presentations and take-home presentation interviews. The next thing we're going to get is a cross-functional team interview. Now this, depending upon the role you're in, can be minor or it could be massive. So I took a chief architect role for the healthcare vertical at Cisco, where I was responsible for the architecture for all of healthcare. Now, in this role, I already worked for Cisco. I had already been there. I had already won multiple awards being at Cisco, and I had 16 interviews to go from the one department to the other. Now, what was going on in all these cross-functional interviews? There was the C-suite team that wanted to see if I had enough CXO relevancy. There was the marketing team to see how I'd get along with the executives in marketing. There was the sales team that was concerned at how I could help their sales along the way. Then there were the consulting teams that wanted to know how we were going to fit together. And then there were stakeholders from every single department. So what they were trying to fit here is, can I relate to the people? How will the salespeople feel about me? Is it good? Okay, because we need Mike to help with sales. Now, if Mike's designing architectures and marketing's designing architectures and marketing publishes the architectures, but it's being designed here, how's that going to work together? So what do I do instead? I was like, okay, this is assigned to me. This is assigned to you. Now we do it together and it's done. And if you see the medical grade architecture that Cisco put out there, you'll see that it was designed by two people. My friend Howard Quillen, who was interesting at a cool PhD, and me. We had lots of fun and we put it together. So it doesn't matter. They're trying to see, are you that person that's going to be cooperative with their team? So that's what they're looking for. And then they're going to give all kinds of case interviews. And what's a case interview? A case interview is where I give you some theoretical business problem or technical problem, and I want to see how you solve problems. It could be anything like an MBA case study that we would get in business school, to just an informal thing where I present a situation. A business is having this challenge, this challenge, this challenge, this challenge, where we're trying to see how you solve it and the way you think it. Complex architectural challenges, those kinds of things. So that's what we're really looking for. Now, I'll talk about the kind of questions we do, but Alonzo, did you want to add to any of those, or did I miss any along the way?
I think you had a full scope of what I've experienced in the past, what we teach here, and how people can understand how to navigate. Now, one of the things that we also teach is, what if everything goes wrong? What if you're dealing with someone or an interviewer who hasn't had a good day? You know, how are you going to mitigate the frustrations that have nothing to do with you, but yet you have to, quote unquote, weather the storm of that interview? What do you do? How do you maintain your composure? And how can you simultaneously de-escalate the frustration of which you did not create, but still bring across your competency and the ability to do the job? So there are a lot of different things and nuances and chemistry that we discuss as well.
Yeah, and Alonzo, I'm going to ask you to react to this, because, and then we'll get into the questions next. But I want you to all consider this. And I know you've been an executive. I know you come from a long line of strategy consultants. I know you've got an MBA or yourself. I know you've also managed people. And this is the results of me asking every manager I could find, every executive I could find, and every recruiter I could find for the last 25 years. I asked them, what do managers want in a tech professional? What is it that tech professional that manager wants so badly that no matter what, and if they show up and they can deliver this on an interview, they get hired? And the list was overwhelmingly simple. And I'm going to tell you that both as a manager, as a CEO, and as anyone that's gotten people hired, if you display these things, all of them, and you can do it well, pretty much you're going to get any job you want. It's just a matter of time. I can also tell people that if they've been on more than 3 interviews, meaning they interviewed at 3 different companies for an architect job, solution architect or cloud architect, and they didn't get hired, stop interviewing, figure out what your skills gaps are, figure out what the challenge is, and then fix it. And remind me to talk about that later, Alonzo. Because if you have these skills, you'll get hired on almost every interview. I've never been on an interview where I didn't get a job. So what hiring managers overwhelming want is someone that can actually do the job. Hence the competency questions. Can you actually do the job? How would you solve this problem? That's a competency question. And I'm going to give examples of different types of competency questions because they're different for different people. So, but I have to determine if you can do the job. The next thing that I care about is, can I trust you? The overwhelming majority of people lie to us on interviews. Would you marry someone you didn't trust? I wouldn't. Would you hire someone you don't trust? I wouldn't. So that is something really key. So you've got to show honor. So don't lie on your interview and don't have fake stuff on your resume. Because when we ask you about the things on your resume, if you can't answer them, it's considered false advertising and the interview is actually over. Now, the next thing that we really care about, especially in tech, in engineers, especially because they're hands-on, but also in architects because they're systems designers. Do you know what you know and know what you don't know? And that becomes very clear on an interview. If you ask someone what they know and they tell you, and then you probe them on what they know and they don't know it, there's two problems. One is they don't know what they know and they don't even know what they don't know. And that is the most dangerous person on your team. You give me someone with no background that we've shown to do three things to, and now it's the fourth time, and she comes over to me and says, how do I do this? And I show her and she gets it right and she does it again and again and again. And then she comes back and says, this is the fifth thing. How do I do it? That's someone I hire because I am happy to train them and they are fine. That's someone with a willingness to work. But what do you know? I know BGP. Okay, explain the BGP best path selection algorithm. Huh? Okay, tell me about the BGP finite state machine. Huh? Tell me about how I would do BGP traffic engineering. Huh? That person escorted out of the door. It's over. It's a courtesy interview for the rest of the time. I hope that actually makes sense and why. So, be honest with what you don't know. I don't know this. You heard Gladys talk about it on an interview yesterday right before she got her first architect job. And then she pointed them to her energy, enthusiasm, her passion, her motivation, and what she did know. And they asked her questions about what you did know, and she wowed them. So the next things that I care about, are you going to be energetic, enthusiastic, and passionate? I don't know about you, but I don't want to pay someone to sit around and do nothing. I don't want to pay someone to have them look at me and I mean, I don't want that person on my team. I don't want to feel like if I'm calling someone, I'm waking them up and I'm disturbing them during their business hours. So employers want energy, enthusiasm, and passion. Employers also need and demand emotionally intelligent people. Jack Welch used to call them energizers. These are the people that walked into the room and made everybody feel good. And the last two things employers want are people that work in teams and work well with teams and can improve team harmony, and people that are willing to go above and beyond. Because you never know when you need that person to go above and beyond. So these are what we need. We're hiring for. These are what we're looking for. Only half the tech. And there's a video, Tyrone, if you want to find it. I have a VP of NVIDIA, Alvin DaCosta. He and I were peers. He was my manager. I was getting him promoted. He was getting me promoted. We were helping each other. We were like best friends. Really great guy. And he talks about passing over people with the best skills if they don't have the right soft skills, communication skills. You can see that. I'm pretty sure we have another video from Darryl Proctor, another hiring manager who talks about the same thing. We've got lots of videos with Christina Marino on this channel, the CEO of a national IT recruiting firm, and she talks about that all the time. That likability, all that is just so important. So we've got competency questions that we're trying to talk about. So the first kind of competency question is we may ask you about a technology. So let's talk about the kinds of questions. If I'm going to ask a technician a question, I'm going to ask how to. So, for example, if I was looking for a technician, I would say, how do you launch an EC2 instance on an AWS? And I would want them to know how to do it if I was hiring a technician, because that's what technicians do. Now, if I was hiring an actual engineer, I'd want to ask them something that's a little bit deeper. Okay, you need to set up about 15,000 of these systems. They need this kind of storage. They need to be in these types of subnets. How would you go about doing that in an efficient manner? Because now I need that person to think, okay, what are my options? This is going to be a nightmare on a management console. The CLI could do it. If we use infrastructure as code as we can do it. And what do we gain and what do we lose? That's an engineer thing, like a cloud engineer or DevOps engineer. Notice, more thinking involved. And by the time I get to an architect, there's no touching the technology anymore. It is more of a competency question. So if I'm asking a network architect a competency question, I might ask a question like, okay, in OSPF, we have several types of LSAs and we have several types of areas. What type of link state advertisements are there and what type of link state advertisements are in these areas? And I would look for a network architect for them, say a type 1 LSA in OSPF is generated by the router. A type 2 LSA is generated by the designated router and the backup generating designated router. A type 3 LSA is related to a link or an state advertisement from a different area. And a type 4 LSA is related to how do you reach the autonomous system border router, which is the router that connects to the external domain doing the route redistribution. And a type 5 LSA is an external LSA because another route is being externally redistributed into it. And we have two kinds of that. We have an OE2, which doesn't increase the metric at each route. And we have an OE1 where the metric increases at every hop. Now we also have these types of areas. In a traditional area, like I talked about, we have all those LSAs that I described. In a stub area, we have a type 1 LSA, a type 2 LSA, and of course the inter-area LSAs, those type 3s. In a totally stubby area, we only have a type 1 and type 2 LSA inside of that area and a default route in. But in a not so stubby area, we have a type 1, type 2, type 3 LSA, and we also have a type 7 LSA, which is basically a type 5 that's been remade to be allowed into a stub area. Now, why did I ask a question like that? Because if that person knows it that well, Alonzo, do you think that person's going to make mistakes in how they design their OSPF
Highly
areas?
doubtful. Yeah, they know their stuff.
But if I told you I can configure it, hey, Alonzo, I can type config T, interface gigabit Ethernet 0/0 IP address, put the IP address, no shot. Router OSPF1, network, whatever network I put on that OSPF interface, area 0. You wouldn't think I was going to be designing a system like that.
You're not touching my system.
Exactly. So that's that kind of competency question that we're going to ask, and it's going to change. There's also going to be the trick question. And the trick question under competency, Alonzo. And I want you to be tricked the first time. Alonzo, what's the best technology for cloud computing? Who's the best cloud?
Oh, the best is AWS. The best, they've got everything you need, and they can solve any networking issue and provide really cheap solutions across the board.
Okay, that was a trick question, and I asked Alonzo to be fooled by it, and that's why he gave you that ridiculous response. So here's what I'm going to make it very clear to you. Why did I ask that question? Because if I'm hiring an architect, I want a trusted advisor. I want someone that understands the client's needs and understand that every client needs something different. I know that the best architecture is the one that best meets that client's needs and gets them to their goal. And if it involves a mainframe, great. If it involves an old school data center, great. If it involves AWS, great. If it involves all clouds, great. But I don't want someone to make a decision on what's best before even knowing the challenges.
Yeah.
Imagine going to an auditorium with 50,000 people and a surgeon struts on stage and says, "Everybody's getting back surgery today." And you looked at the person next to you and you said, "Do you have back pain?" And she said, "No." You looked at the person right to you and he said, "I don't have back pain either. Why am I getting back surgery?" Well, a lot of people will prove that. That is a trick question. I may also ask other trick questions. One of the things that people used to use, they used to love in OSPF, they would say it was a trick question for two things. If you only knew a little bit, like enough to pass the CCNA exam, you would have one answer. But if you knew anything about the protocol, you would have a different answer. So they used to use, it was a trick question to pick out the good people versus the people that didn't know. And they would say, what's the IP multicast address used in OSPF? And the reason they would ask that, if someone had like a CCNA level knowledge or lower, they would say it's 224.0.0.5. And that would be correct at that level of knowledge. But if you really knew the protocol, you would say, which IP multicast address are you looking for? And they'd say, what do you mean? And you could say 224.0.0.5 is all SPF routers in OSPF, but 224.0.0.6 is DR as designated routers and backup designated routers. Which particular IP address are you looking for in this case? Because it showed me who actually passed a junior level certification versus who actually learned the protocol. And that could have been something just like about that. So I have to ask those kinds of questions on competency. And I will have to ask competency on tech, but I'm also going to ask you competency on business. Because if your architect is marriage of business and tech, Now, if you're a solutions architect, it might be 60% business, 40% tech. You're a cloud architect, it could be 50, 60, 70% business and 30 to 50% tech. Now you're an enterprise architect and it's 80% business. So a competency question to an enterprise architect could be, could you tell me about an organization's business architecture, what it is, what resembles, and what's necessary to make, what kind of changes would be necessary to make that, along with their people and their technology to drive digital transformation. Because if the person doesn't understand what a business architecture is, they sure can't create a new business architecture. And if they don't understand the alignment of the people, the processes, and technology of the forces of business, they can't create a new strategy. They can't do any of it. So that's why we have to ask these kinds of complicated technologies. So I could ask someone, how would you solve this architectural challenge? And I'd give them a scenario. Now, that would be an architecture competency question. I might say, okay, we need a high-performance financial trading system. Each millisecond of latency, each millisecond of latency that we can lose will yield an additional $30 million in revenue for the trading system per quarter, or $120 million a year. What types of things could you do to release the latency in a system like this? How would you reduce the latency in a system like this and also add high availability at the same time? Why am I asking these kinds of questions? Because it makes me think. If I need to reduce latency, do I go bare metal or do I go hypervisor? Usually less latency. Where do I want to store it? Probably directly in the server if I need latency, if it's related to storage thing. Is it going to be DRAM intensive where I got to stock the stuff in this RAM? Is this system going to be CPU intensive? And if so, is it a single threaded application or a multi-threaded application? Is it going to benefit from a higher frequency clock speed, or is it going to need more cores? What kind of networking thing does this need? Do I have a virtual switch? Do I have all these things plugged into the same rack and have redundant racks? Do I do my data center to minimize the wide area networking time? What other trade-offs do I need to make it lower latency? Because we can do it. We can do anything as long as we know what we're doing. We figure out how to do it and bring in the right people. So that's why we're going to ask those kinds of questions. Those are competency questions. Now, I'll ask more businessy questions too, related to what's your knowledge with architecture governance and what's being related to, and how do you make sure your architecture is going to have a successful governance structure and people are going to be willing to adopt it. Because again, I'm going back into these same architecture things. Does the person understand cultural change? Does he understand stakeholders? Do they have the stakeholder management? So there's those kinds of questions we typically ask. And then we ask situational schedules too. Okay, you're on an architecture and you're behind schedule. So Alonzo, you're on an architecture project and it's behind schedule. What type of things would you do to keep everyone happy?
Well, number one, we've got to be honest. Okay, the worst thing you can do is hide what's going on. You'll make a lot of people angry, and that will be a very quick way for you to be rolled off the project. So number one, we have to understand we're going to be late. We're going to be late, and we need to understand what it's going to affect. It's going to affect actual rollout. It's going to affect the budget. It's going to possibly affect the resources allocated for that specific time, place, and department. What does that look like? How can we mitigate that risk? What are the overall outcomes, additional money, and things of that nature? So we have to understand what the problem is, what happened, how do we mitigate that risk, and how we ultimately get back on goal and on track.
I want everybody to understand this. Alonzo and I don't script this stuff. I'm asking him these questions on the fly. I know Alonzo's managed projects that were late because it happens to everybody. Yeah. If you're around long enough, it's like the network engineers that say they've never locked themselves out of a router. If they actually worked as an engineer, at some point they put some silly access list on, locked themselves out of a router, and had to figure out a way to get back to that, especially remote. It's happened to everybody. So that's what I'm kind of look for. And no, we don't make this stuff up ahead of time. We just do it on the fly.
And you know what? A good thing about that is emotional intelligence. It's not a matter of if, it's going to be a matter of when. Myself, someone on the team, you're going to get locked out. You're going to forget this, reconfigure that. It's going to happen. It's going to have mistakes. And as an architect, you may have to take the responsibility and say, it's my fault, so that I can protect my team. I can take lessons learned from this, and then actually talk with, the team and say, you know what? We got to be careful with our mistakes. We got to understand how we have to do this, that, and the other. I was able to mitigate the risk. I took the heat. However, moving forward, mistakes happen, but let's learn from that, reduce the chances of this happening again, and let's move forward. You're going to make friends. You're going to show that you're a leader. You're going to show that you have, you can handle stress, problematic issues, and you're able to come up with solutions so that your team can learn, grow, and adapt for other projects, and actually keep driving and striving for success.
Yeah.
But one thing I want to share with you, Mike, is that you wanted me to remind you about what happens if you've gone on the first, second, and third interview with no success. What happens? What should you do?
Okay. So, and then it's a good thing to ask this question, and we'll get into some other questions. So if you've been on an interview and it didn't work, maybe you got told, I'll come back when you have more experience. And then you went on a second interview and it didn't work. And then you went on a third interview and it didn't work. There's a problem. Now, that's when you need to sit back. You either need to assess the problem yourself, if you can, or you need to find an expert in the field to ask you and help you diagnose the problem. I will tell you from experience, in most cases, it's actually a competency issue. Most people have very little depth on anything, and what they've done is they've spread themselves so thin, and they've learned a whole lot of hands-on skills. And you can typically see it. Alonzo will see a lot of times. Someone will say, I've done this certification. I've done this. I took this boot camp. I have this. And I say, great. And I say, okay, how would you design this? And they're like, I don't know. How would you use this versus this or this? And they say, I don't know. How would you do this, this, and this? And they'd say, I don't know. And then it's very clear to me. Do you know how to write a Python script? Oh, yes. Do you know how to write a Bash script? Oh, yes. Do you know how to administer Linux? Oh, yes. And they do. And they are good at it. Do you know how to write Terraform? Yes, I know how to write Terraform. The problem is none of that has anything to do with the architect job. So that's why we're looking for a certain set of answers. So if you go on 3 interviews, and let's say you've been preparing to be a solutions architect, and that's what you've been learning, and what'll make it worse is you got a list of cloud projects or a GitHub page that are all hands-on things, which are showing you're doing somebody else's job. And you go on 3 interviews. Either you don't understand architecture and system design, which is usually what happens. It's a competency question. The person prepared for a different job. Quite possible. If it's not that, it's either the way you're communicating it, because you can't make it simple for the person to be able to know what you know. Why am I saying this? The only way I know what's in your head is by asking you questions. You could be the smartest person in the world who knows it better than anyone else in the world, but if you can't explain it to me, I'm not going to know that you know it. Yeah. So that's why often, a lot of times, the best tech people are actually passed over for these other jobs. The people that can do anything, because no one knows that they can, until they get a track record of success. But that's no good on your first job. The other part of it is your resume is just wrong, and they're asking you questions and you can't answer it, and they don't trust you. Or the reality is there's something in your attitude that needs to change. Or there's something in your social media that got you in trouble. So those are the kind of things that are, if you don't get hired on 3 interviews or more for the same job. Now, I'm not saying, now if one day you interviewed for an enterprise architect job, and another day you interviewed for a DevOps engineer job, and a week after that you interviewed to be an airplane pilot, look, that's not what I'm talking about. These are 3 different things. But if you're interviewing for the same job in 3 different companies and they all have the same feeling, usually you need to go back to the drawing board. Because what you don't want to do is go on 30 more interviews and get rejected all 30 times, hurt your ego, hurt your confidence. And when you finally find the good job, you won't be able to portray yourself in the good way, because you'll be beaten up. You'll have PTSD from all the interviews. So better to fix the gap. And I did it myself. When I started my tech career, I mean, I wasn't lucky enough to even get the interviews, but I had 6 certifications. Nobody had any interest. I took different training, and then poof, everything got better, and I was instantly hired. I'm also going to ask you personal and professional development questions. For example, Alonzo was a working cloud architect. And Alonzo's very smart, but I might say, Alonzo, I'm very curious about you as an architect and what you're doing to get better. I'm specifically concerned about making sure you have strong business acumen, that you're going to get it or get some education in business acumen, or that you've done it. And I'm also concerned that the world of AI and how it's changing, it would be good if you know AI. Alonzo, could you tell me what you've done in your life to enhance your business acumen and improve your artificial intelligence skills, even though you're a cloud architect?
Absolutely. One of the things that I constantly focus on is that technology is not a static environment. It's full of dynamics, and I have to grow with that, meaning that I'm a didactic. I'm constantly focused on learning new concepts, understanding industry knowledge, how I can apply it for business value, and seeking out resources that uplift my skills. So I'm always focused on that, so that not only can I improve myself, but I can also bring that knowledge to my team and my team leader for support.
Okay, and have you done any kind of AI training or a business acumen training in your career too?
I sure have. One of the things that I've done is that I have worked and done a lot of things for Go Cloud Careers and focused on bringing business value, being able to communicate what I learn and how I can bring and help students grow into the roles of being cloud architects. I also have taken upon opportunities to work with David Linthicum for his generative AI development program to further hone my skills and increase that knowledge. As we know, generative AI and AI as a whole is going to be a constant within our technological orbit. And I want to take advantage of that and be one of the subject matter experts to bring value to any business that I come across.
Sounds great, Alonzo. That's the kind of thing I'm looking for. He's taken more AI training. He didn't tell me that he went and got an MBA, which was really the thing. Because again, we're doing this live and on the fly. But that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to look for. Again, this is just live stuff. If you are good enough and you are architect ready and you're job ready, you should be in the position that you've got your elevator pitch ready. You meet the CEO of the company where you want to be. You can show them why you're going to add a lot for them. Another question that I typically ask is, how do you stay updated on current technologies? That's a common question.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I tend to ask this question is it'll tell me a lot about the person. If the person tells me things change every single day, I know that they really don't know anything. And what I mean by this is technology actually changes very slowly. It feels fast to us because we don't realize what a lot of the things we're actually doing. For example, I was working on various clouds in 1993 and 1996. And then other clouds in the 1999, different clouds in 2000, and different clouds in 2001. And I was helping to design these clouds and the various clouds that existed. And one of the things that existed out there were, say, virtual wires. And then one day I saw someone that just passed 6 AWS certifications, and he talked about the most amazing new discovery, Private Link, how they create a virtual wire for you on the AWS network. And it was someone I thought was really nice. I sent him a private message just to let you know these wires have been going around for years. VPLS did it here. Martini Tunnels did it here. The frame relay circuits did it here. So maybe you want to pull that back because this is 30-year-old technology. It wasn't invented yesterday. So a lot of things is I can't go to new tech and move off of old tech if I don't understand the old tech. If I don't understand what the old tech is and what the old tech's benefits are, how do I design new tech? I can't build the migration. So I'm typically asking for that for someone to say, well, like, and I know, Alonzo, you have to go right after this. I'm typically looking for someone to say, well, the key is having really good fundamentals and making sure you nurture those fundamentals. So if your fundamentals are strong in networking and they're strong in data center and they're strong in security and they're strong in AI, then each one of these are just incremental changes to the same system. In most cases, the speeds changed, The feeds change and what we can do with them have changed, but the fundamentals are the same. So I stay current by doing the following: mastering the fundamentals of each thing that I actually learn, finding a way to make it make sense to me, and then attending various conferences, ideally ones that are not sponsored by any vendors, reading trade publications such as CIO Magazine, Tech Republic, Tech Radar, and a few other good things, Information Week, those kinds of things. So, and speaking with my peers, that's what we're kind of looking for. So I think, Alonzo, you've got another meeting. So why don't we do this? Alonzo, do you have anything to say before you leave? And then I'll take questions or give more examples of people are looking for.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things, I love sharing knowledge. I love sharing who I am as a cloud architect, who I am for this organization as Chief Marketing Officer. We want to work with you. I'm definitely looking forward to meeting you. So if there's any questions or anything that you'd like to learn about me, about Mike, about the organization, about the development programs, please go to our website at www.gocloudcareers.com. Look at that upper right-hand corner for video conferencing. Click, scroll down to your chosen time frame, and I'll look forward to meeting you real soon. But until then, thank you so much for your time, and we'll see each other again soon.
So, does anyone, let me see if I can talk for a few more minutes, and then after that, I might actually do. So, I might ask someone their career goals too on an interview, and things that they've accomplished, things that they're proud of, to find out what they're actually proud of. Were they big milestones? So, what did they actually do? Was it a bunch of little things? Was it something big? Did they make changes to the industry? Or where do they want to go? So, for example, one time I interviewed a solutions architect, and the person was doing relatively good on the interview. And I was like, okay. And I said, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And the answer he gave me was, I really hate the idea of being a solutions architect. I don't want it all. I just want to work for your company. And then 2 years from now, I expect to be in another division. And I was like, okay. The rest of the team that was part of that panel interview, was really nice to meet you. The key was, we were looking to see someone that wanted to build a career with our company, someone that loved what they did, that maybe wanted to produce it. If that person said, I really love the solution architect role, and I like it so much that I'm here for a regular solutions architect, and someday I hope to be a senior solutions architect and a principal or a distinguished architect, that would be someone that loves an architecture career and wants an architecture career path. If that person said, I love architecture and I really am enjoying my solution architect time, one day I want to grow with this company, work as a solution architect for a while, learn various parts of the business, and potentially be an enterprise architect, I'd still be fine with it. And if that person said, I really love solution architecture, it's my thing, I want to work in this role, and while I'm in this role, maybe go to business school at the same time, and then move into a leadership role where I manage other solutions architects, where I've got the experience as a solution architect and as a manager, again, I'd be fine with that. But I don't want this job. No. And that's the kind of things that we're trying to look for. We're looking for this information. And if you ask the questions the right way, you'd be surprised the kind of information you get. So I might also ask these kinds of situational questions. If I'm dealing with an architect and an enterprise architect, I might say, what does it take to get an organization to actually use the technology that they've actually purchased, to adopt the actual technology? Because I'm looking to see if that architect knows that just by putting the tech there does nothing. That in order to put the tech there, first, hopefully it's the right tech and hopefully it's the correct solution, but the people aren't going to use it. There was a book called Who Moved My Cheese many years ago, which showed that people just don't like to adapt, don't like to change unless they're forced to it. So if an organization needs to change their business processes, and their business processes need to support a new level or type of software, what the organization needs to do is this: what that architect has to work with those organization stakeholders, and it has to get the stakeholders buy-in and support. And that architect is out there finding champions and other people that will support the changes they want. And that architect is building teams. That architect is working with those people to developing a marketing campaign, potentially a collateral campaign on the benefits of this. That architect might be coordinating training sessions on the adoption of these new things. So a lot of that goes into even making sure the technology is adopted, which is why when an architect thinks they're going to be writing Python scripts or doing DevOps, that's not architecture. And that's kind of why these are the things we're doing once we start getting into enterprise architect roles and to a large degree, cloud architecture roles as well. Tyrone, does anyone have any questions for me? See if anybody's got any questions for me because I do want to help. From Preb, I know Preb, it's always good to see you. I know architects do not need hands-on to configure text. For skills like penetration testing and the CEH, you need some hands-on. If not, how do you proceed? So, Preb, let's look at this. If you wanted to be a penetration tester, then yes, you need to be very hands-on. So that would mean for a penetration tester, they need good skills with Kali Linux. They're going to need good hands-on networking skills. They're going to need some degree of scripting skills if they're going to be a hacker. And they need to understand the weaknesses operating. They need to have very good hands-on skills. And that's why when you look at a test, not the CEH, but the CEH Master or the OSCP, which are penetration testing certifications designed for penetration engineers or white hat hackers, for example, or ethical hackers, yes, they are hands-on engineering roles. Now, when you look at more architecture-related certifications, such as the CISSP, or the CCSP, or the CISM, you'll note they don't have anything related to hands-on in them at all. They're 100% conceptual. They're 100% business. So if I was an architect, given the certifications that are out there, I would use one of the 3 architect certifications that we were talking about, the CISSP as the primary one, the CCSP potentially, and the CISM. Any combination of those would be good. For a security architect, I would get maybe a basic cloud certification like the Solutions Architect Professional and be done with it for a cloud security architect. But for architects, no hands-on. For penetration testers, lots and lots and lots of hands-on. Good question. In the modern world, it feels security, solution, and cloud architecture are getting closer and closer. Things like secure by design and zero trust is a game changer. So, little bit. So, SDO, let's talk about why we ultimately came to zero trust. Because I don't view it as a game changer at all. And I'll tell you why I don't view it as a traditional game changer. And I'll talk about why we still need zero trust. So I will tell you that security is every part of the organization. I agree with you. Definitely part of it. And we still have to remember that security is encompassing 1,000,001 different careers. So we've got application security. We've got network security. We've got IAM doing its own thing, and there's various things. So even in security, we've got various sets of security careers, unless we're talking about architects that sort of tie the pieces together. So there's that. Now, if we look at a traditional cloud, like a VMware cloud or an OpenStack cloud or a Nutanix cloud, I can put a level of security in my network that I can't even come close to in the cloud. I can put my users and I can put my servers in the same VLAN where they can't even talk to each other at layer 2. I can run admission control of which things are doing. I can create layer 2 access lists and layer 3 access lists between subnets. I can put any kind of rule I want, and I can do a level of traffic shaping, policing, and things on my private data center that I can't do in the cloud. In my private data center, I have ingress and egress points, and I've got a lot more segmentation and micro segmentation and security that I can do. So what we used to do in the data center was we had very hard exteriors, and inside of organization, we ran some form of zero trust, which was identity and access management, which meant before you could get access to any resource, you had to log into the system and prove you are who you claim to be. And every time you access the resource, Microsoft Active Directory or something would say you could access it or not. Now, what ultimately happened is what the zero trust people like to say was, well, that's not true. We used to have a hard exterior and no security in the interior. Well, if you just want to go up and look at how old Microsoft Active Directory is, you'll realize exactly how ridiculous that actually was. At the same time, you'll also see that we had many of these same IAM solutions. Now, When we get to the cloud with softer perimeters, we don't have a choice. We have to go to zero trust. So zero trust is basically admitting the cloud's weaker in terms of security. We don't have as many layers of security, so we need a new paradigm. So what is that new paradigm? Microsegmentation. Of course, we can't do as much microsegmentation on the cloud as we could in the data center, so we lose some of that, but that's okay. We still gain other things. Assuming breach at all times, which many good organizations have been doing for the last 30 years, the banks that I've worked with, for example, they automatically assume their breach and they encrypt everything and they secure it. But zero trust is saying, hey, you got to assume breach, you got to encrypt it, and you got to secure it. So what I'd say is zero trust, and yes, it does change some things. I like it. It's good. And it's what the best we can do with what we have. But we have much more security options in the private cloud that we can actually do, which may have made it whether we needed zero trust or not. But I still think zero trust plus the defense in depth that we're using makes a great solution. And that's where I'm at. I don't just do zero trust. I don't just do defense in depth. I use it all. And I use the same philosophy that I've learned in martial arts. I studied martial arts my entire life. You know, where I come from, we're taught very warrior style. Krav Maga is an art that I learned, for example. I did a little Russian system. These are military arts. They're used for war. And they're focused on war. And they're focused on standing. I've also realized that sometimes people get stuck on the ground. So I studied Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for that. And also sometimes there's a lot of striking. So martial artists like me studied some Muay Thai. And why do we do that? Because each one of these arts has their strengths and their weaknesses. And I wanted to be better. So kind of hope that makes sense. And I do love zero trust. I do teach zero trust, but at least I just want to tie all the pieces together. Not just tech, but how do you stay on the top trends on working? So let's talk about where that actually matters and why it probably matters a little less than before. And what are the implications of what's going on in the economy right now? And it's pertaining on working trends. So prior to COVID, some of us worked from home and many people went to the office. During COVID, employees started working from home. It in many ways was really great. Unfortunately, if you actually look at labor productivity numbers, they actually went down. And unfortunately, if you actually look at the data, LinkedIn ran a survey last year of American workers, and the majority of American workers felt disconnected from their company. And these are not my words, this is the study's words. 54% of American workers, specifically those that were in the working from home environment, were doing the bare minimum not to get fired. And under the Karen environment, 17% of employees were actually trying to hurt their companies. Now, if you really think about that SDO, it means the average business could fire 70% of its employees and not notice a difference. Think about that. I don't believe that. I believe working from home is a good thing and it can be done. So what have employers started to do in response to these poor productivity numbers? Come back to the office, come back to the office, come back to the office. And the other side of it is people are saying, I'm not coming back. I'm not coming back. I'll go somewhere else. And now you're starting to see people on LinkedIn say, you know, and they don't even realize what they're saying. They're a work from home advocate, and they're saying, I can easily manage a team overseas just as good as I can manage a team in the US. Now, when we manage a team overseas, we typically expect a bit of a productivity loss because, you know, it's hard and far. There's barriers and things that go on at different times. But we usually are thrilled to lose a little bit of productivity because there's typically an arbitrage in salaries. So what the people are actually saying is, I can manage remote workers in any part of the world as well as I can manage remote workers in the USA. Here's the next step in remote working. Jobs like architects, where you got to meet with people and you've got to talk to people and you've got to be with clients and build relationships, they're going to be the safest in the world. Work from home engineers become outsourced to other parts of the world if they're not willing to come to the office. I don't want to see it. I hate to see it. But if you can't get someone to come into the office, why would they pay 3 to 5 times more to have somebody work from home in America versus somewhere else? So that's probably your new and future trends. So how do you stay on top of things? What you do is you look at the macroeconomic environment, you look at the microeconomic environment, you look at the productivity numbers, you look at where the money's actually flowing, and you look at the decisions business are doing. And then you look at the industry leaders and they're saying, oh, you must come back to the office. And many of the biggest companies actually mandated it. So they weren't getting what they needed, or they didn't feel they were getting what they needed, or they felt people were feeling disconnected. I don't think we're done with working from home. I think where the work from home, somewhere along the line, the productivity thing is going to get cranked back up. And even if it's a couple percent, just a couple percent more will be there. And then poof, people will be working from home again. And what is a couple of percent? Let's say we've got someone working from 9 to 5. If they're in the office from 9 to 5, maybe they eat at their desk. So they're working 7.5 hours. If we have the person working 9 to 5 at home, and then they take a yoga class during the day for an hour, and then they take a 30-minute walk per hour, you're losing about 12% of that person's time. Personally, I'd rather take my yoga class and work an extra hour late. That's always what I did. I always took my yoga classes and my martial arts classes, but that's how you can kind of see it. So you can't listen to what people are telling you necessarily. You got to follow the money. You got to see what's going on, and you got to look at the decisions and challenges people face, just like designing an architecture. Okay, these are the economic forces going on. These are the tools that we have. How can we deal with this challenge with these tools? Really like the way you're asking the questions. And yes, because the trends of working changes, because if I'm working from home, maybe I might think about a SASE WAN versus a traditional IPsec work from home policy. Or maybe there's a combination of that. So yeah, when we obviously have to keep track of what's going on in all aspects of life, working, economics, finance, cost of capital, insurance rates. For example, we're a security architect, and all of a sudden insurance rates go up. That means the cost for a business to transfer the risk to an insurance company just went up. It may now be cheaper for that organization to mitigate that risk with some additional security things, which means we might be able to sell more things from an architecture perspective. I hope that works. How do we push back during an interview for an architect when they interview themselves into engineering activities? Well, first, I'm going to tell you why the interviewing team is most likely going to interview in engineering activities. So if your resume is filled with a bunch of technical jargon, I promise you, you're going to get a brutally technical engineering interview. Arun was supposed to join us yesterday. I really wish he did. And Arun was my student, and he was starting to get frustrated. And he got frustrated because he said, Mike, I've been on about a certain number of interviews, and they keep going down this weird engineering pathway, not architecture. What's going on? And I said, Arun, can we see your resume? And we got to class, and I took the whole 2-hour class, and we worked on Arun's resume. And he had things like pushing stuff to Git. He had DevOps tools. He was talking about writing Python. I don't know what the heck was on it. It had a SysOps certification and a DevOps certification. I think he even did the developer associate certification. And he went on interviews, and all he got was engineering questions. And I'll tell you the other reason it could be occurring, Manny, too. And I said, Arun, could you come to class? And can I edit your resume in class? And Arun's like, Mike, I've been in your training for 6 months. I just want to get hired. Do whatever you want. So Manny, in that class, I took Arun's resume. I got rid of everything related to code. I got rid of everything related to DevOps and SysOps and development, all that other hands-on stuff. I changed it with things that he had done on our training, like respond to RFIs, RFPs, RFQs, design 5 nines available systems for various industries, including banking and healthcare, giving presentations to C-suite leaders, creation of architectural documents and architectural artifacts. You know, all the stuff that architects actually did. Well, now, poof, 3 companies interviewed him, and he was getting offers from multiple of them. The point is, that's usually what happens. Here's the other time you might get an engineering question. If I were to ask someone a question, and when I ask the question, it's clear to me that they don't understand it. And I'll give you an example. Then I'm going to start delving into questions. So for example, if I said someone, compare and contrast block storage, and object storage in the AWS cloud. If I got this answer, Manny, with AWS S3, you create a bucket and you create a bucket policy. And with Elastic Block Storage, you set it up, you determine which speed you need, like PI, OPS, etc. And if I got that, the next set of questions that I'm going to go down is, tell me about the architecture of block storage. Tell me about how the blocks are arranged on the drive. Talk to me about the decoupling of the server and the storage infrastructure in block. Talk to me about this. Now, by comparison, Manny, and I'll give you the other side where it could go really wacky too. And because there's 3 causes of this. Now, if the person had responded and say, well, block storage and object storage are both types of network attached storage or storage area networks based upon the terminology you prefer to use. With object storage, what we do is we take our data and we actually store it as an object, and much like a database structure. And when the object is actually stored in object storage, it creates some metadata, which is actually some data about the data, which enables us to do some great many things, which I'll talk about in a minute. We have to remember that object storage, once we write something, it's considered write once, read many times storage, which means once we write it to storage, it's not going to change. Effectively, it's immutable unless you disable these typical features in object storage. Anytime we would touch the object, change the object a bit, it would create a new version. Now, of course, the cloud providers have disabled that and enabled it based upon your need, your desires, things like versioning in AWS, but that's the native architecture of object storage. Because object storage is the write once, read many times, we can't really mount it to virtual machines, so we're not going to use it for compute storage as a rule. We're going to use it for backup and archival purposes, software distribution. Now, I mentioned that object storage has metadata, which is data about the data. Now, that's useful in the big data environment because we can query certain parts of that knowledge, for example, and we don't have to look through the entire part. So it integrates well into big data. Now, let's talk about block storage. What's unique about block storage is, yes, it is a storage area network, but it's widely used in cloud computing because it decouples the storage infrastructure from the server infrastructure. What I mean by that is in a traditional data center or in a traditional server environment, we're limited to the amount of storage we can place in the server. And when we run out of that server storage space, we don't have anything else. In object storage, in block storage, what we're doing is we're setting up these large storage area networks with these big giant RAID arrays that have a large number of hard drives. And we can place them anywhere where we have IP connectivity to these systems. By doing so, we can store our data anywhere. So when we need additional capacity, no big deal. We just buy additional RAID arrays. Now, with block storage, what we have to remember is when we take the data and write it to a hard drive, a local hard drive is typically written in blocks. And when over the network, when we write to block storage, it's also written in blocks. And because it's written in the same manner that it actually is on the traditional internal hard drive, the server itself can view block storage as a virtual hard drive. That's why we typically use block storage as virtual hard drives in cloud computing. Now, if I got that answer, Manny, I'm not going to answer a test question. Now, the next place where people get themselves in trouble, where it starts going down tech, is they start answering a question and adding too much extra stuff. And the extra stuff they add to the answer they give us all goes down a path where it exposes a weakness. So in a particular example, if I were to talk to someone, what is BGP and why do we use it? And then they said to me, well, BGP is a path vector routing protocol that's used to connect to external domains. BGP is used because it is very policy-based. You can tell it exactly what you want it to do. We use BGP because it scales well to well over 1 million routes with other routing protocols to cut down to, and it enables us to manually tune our traffic so we can send our traffic one way versus another way. We also use BGP because it enables us to create barriers between external organizations. If the person said that, great. Now, if the person said, and of course there's eBGP and iBGP, and eBGP is used to connect to external entities, and iBGP is used for your internal routing. Now, when that last person said iBGP used for internal routing, that's a little weakness in there. And I would say, tell me what you mean by internal routing. And if they were saying, well, look, obviously we have an interior gateway protocol, but we use that for iBGP peer reachability, I'd say fine. But we're never going to get that answer. Usually when someone says iBGP used for internal, they didn't realize that it was to carry other routes across their system, typically speaking, and they thought they could use it as an interior gateway protocol. So if you add too much and then you hit on something that doesn't sound just right, that will cause the interviewer to probe to see, is there the depth that they're looking for? And then if they get an answer that feels more engineering, like they're going to dive in deep to it. So it's kind of like the week. So what you want to do is you want to show what you know. You want to mitigate what you don't know. You want to say just the right amount and then close it before you go outside your comfort zone. I hope that helps. Do you have any books for tech, for cloud security? Well, yes. So John Smith, on our YouTube channel, we actually have a complete free CCSP program. That is one of the preeminent professional level cloud security certifications. And we also have an ebook that you can have with that completely free. I think our team wrote it. I think our ebook was like 400 or 500 pages of notes. So it's pretty comprehensive on cloud security, and it's free. Tyrone, please drop the link of from our CCSP book, and please provide the link for the CCSP bootcamp. Additionally, John, I can recommend, I think it's Mike Chappell wrote really good books for the CISSP. I think he also writes them for the CCSP. So I would get those books from the ISC squared. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of good stuff out there for the most part, but those three tend to be pretty good. The official documentation and publications, and that will give you some help. Stick around on this channel. We do a lot of cybersecurity things. Now, here's a tough one from Michael. How do you change your mindset to adopt a cloud architecture mindset while transitioning into cloud architecture? Example, if you were previously a big data architect, which makes it difficult to switch. Michael, you are absolutely right. You're actually sometimes in a more challenging position with experience than if you've never had the experience. And in other cases, when you learn how to leverage that experience, wow, that's where you really shine. So when you come from a specialty world, and I come from a specialty world like networking, your focus has to get a lot deeper on the technology of that specific thing. Now, when you ultimately take a bigger role, like a cloud architect role or an enterprise architect role, it's actually a bit of a different kind of role. So what I mean by this is, in medicine, we have a primary care provider and internal medicine specialist. And I want to show you the difference. And then I'm going to bring it back. When I practiced internal medicine, someone came in for a normal visit. I treated them. Someone had high blood pressure on 3 separate occasions. Even though I could treat the high blood pressure, I'd say, please see the cardiologist. Somebody came in with back pain. I gave them nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories, ordered an MRI. Something popped up on the MRI. I say, you need to see the orthopedic surgeon and or the neurologist. And what I was doing there is I was taking that big picture role. I was keeping track of their health. I was keeping track of all the things that came back from all of their the physicians. And that's the cloud architect role. It is the big one. So what would you do if you were a physician that was focusing on someone's hands for the last 20 years, and now you have to focus on the entire body, when what you know best is hands? And your focus is always going to be looking at hands because that's what's trained in you. So this is where you got to take a step back. And this is where you have to constantly remind yourself, am I doing what was part of my old job? And am I doing what I need to do for my new job? And for me, if I let myself, and believe me, if I let myself, the first thing that I see is the network. But I don't let myself do that. I always make myself zoom out so that I know so I look at everything, the compute, the storage, the network, the security, the AI, the data, the big data. So with that, that's really what I want you to think of. How do you come back? Now, at the same time, if you weren't really business focused because you were a specialty architect, and some of them are a little less, you now need to change your focus on everything. And I'd say, ask this question every time, Michael. What is the impact going to be on the business? What is the impact going to be on the business? What is the impact going to be on the business? And by doing that, It'll constantly get you there. Because if you're thinking of your data thing, because it's not too hard to do, especially if you're really skilled. And now all of a sudden you got to go think on the end-to-end thing. And you think this data thing, what's the data impact on the network? What's the data's impact on compute? What's that data's impact on storage? What's that data's impact on security? What's that data's impact on AI? So now it's kind of like a 3D problem as opposed to the two-dimensional problem that you're dealing with before. So I'd say always try to take a step back. What am I missing? What am I thinking? And that's typically what I try to do, because it's easy to go into that tunnel vision. This is what you know. This is what you don't know. And Michael, you saw I actually gave an architecture project to my students. And honestly, we got some incredibly great architectures out of it. And I gave something that was so perfect for a private cloud versus a public cloud. And the point is because if we're always taught to think cloud and we're always taught to think public cloud, what happens when public cloud is wrong? And at the same time, what happens if we're all networky and data center and the public cloud is right? So I kind of hope that helps. That would be the advice I have. But feel free to ask more here or in class. How do you tackle the salary question? What do you want, given that there is so much variety in salary ranges and sites that ask for data for this architect position? So generally speaking, if I go in with a recruiter, which is what I go in with, probably not going to be an issue. So who's generally going to want to know what's your salary? The HR people, which are like the Terminator when it comes to applying for jobs. So the answer, generally speaking, if a manager asked me, what's your expected salary? Here's what I'm going to say. I need to learn more about the role. I need to know what I'll be doing in the role to actually make an informed decision on that. But what I'm most concerned about is finding a place where I can make a big impact. Now, that's typically going to get you through most of the time. And why do I want you to do this, Data Wrangler? See, let's say, Data Wrangler, you're awesome. And on the surface, here's what they think they're willing to pay. But Data Wrangler, they meet you and they're like, whoa, I like this Data Wrangler person. Data Wrangler's smart. Data Wrangler's got some business acumen. Data Wrangler can communicate, and Data Wrangler's really likable. Now, all of a sudden, you have more worth than the average person. And in many cases, they can get you more money. So if you pigeonhole to yourself ahead of time before you got the interview, they might cancel the interview. So that's what I typically would do. Because you don't want to talk about it until you're there. And if you notice how people sell expensive products, they don't show you the price until they've made you fall in love with the product. If you're going to buy a McLaren, the first thing is not going to be the price that they show you. If you want to go buy some fancy ring for the girl of your dreams, guy of your dreams, I don't care, and it's a $50,000 or $100,000 diamond, the first thing they don't show you is the price. They talk about the response of the person you're giving the diamond ring to, how you're going to feel, how it's going to shine, the quality, the value, that anything other than the price. And you are a high value person. You are an architect. You are a professional. You've worked hard for your skills. So get them to fall in love with you before you give them the price. Now let's take the exact opposite. Now, Data Wrangler, they pigeonholed you. Mike, what's your expected salary? And it's for, let's say it's for a distinguished architect position. And I'd say I'm currently interviewing for positions that pay between $450 and $600. And I'd leave some wiggle room in there. But that way I'm not demanding them for that, but I'm showing what I'm currently interviewing for. And to a degree, what I'm doing is I'm pinning down some degree of a salary. And I'm also substantiating and justifying it because you're also interviewing with other companies that are being paid the same way. So that's how I would do it. Preferably, it's the last thing you want to do. Make them fall in love with you, see your value, and then you could potentially even get a better job. For example, at MCI WorldCom, the first job I interviewed for, I interviewed to be an engineer, and they made me a senior engineer and gave me a better offer than the one I was actually looking for. I had also interviewed with a networking company. Actually, no, it was a networking company, but it was also a cable company. And on the cable company, the job could only pay this, and the offer I got was better. So instead of hiring me as a network engineer, They hired me as a principal to architect for the same job. So realistically speaking, it was there's rules and what things they can actually do. Staff earn joy. For someone who does not have a bachelor's degree yet, but wants to be an enterprise architect, would you recommend the person try to get a bachelor's degree and then a later MBA? Having experience in supply chain, would you recommend you focus on cloud architect or supply chain firms, bank firms, or healthcare firms, considering they pay more? So, well, let's think about this. What organizations need supply chains? And what industries are they, for example? Healthcare pays the least, generally speaking, of any industry. It's one of the more important industries, but it actually pays the least. Finance typically pays some of the most because they have the most money. But the first thing is, should you get a degree? Well, generally speaking, I love degrees. Now, will they give you what you actually need? It depends where you go. For example, those professors that we have at University of Tennessee at Martin, and you see them on our YouTube channel. There's actually a TikTok class this morning for us. But when I see Dr. Long and I see Dr. Cooper Johnson teaching, I call them periodically and tell them this because I mean it. I wish I was a kid and I could go back to an MBA program and take their course because I think it's just so darn good. Now, other people go to school and they learn who knows what, but they're not learning any skills whatsoever. So, but degrees do open doors to a degree. So I would definitely say you can get hired as a cloud architect without a degree. We actually had Daniel who got hired as a solutions architect without even completing high school or even having a GED. And he was a rock star and the company was lucky to have him. He was great. But I do like degrees. I would say if you have the opportunity to finish your bachelor's degree, do it. And since I know if you're who I think you are, and you're already training to be an architect with us, finish the architect job. Maybe get hired after you get hired, have the company pay for your bachelor's degree, and then let them pay for your MBA too. Like mine paid for my MBA, or at least most of my MBA. So I would probably do that. I think education is good. I think credentials are good. And as we start moving up, the credentials go from, certifications at the entry level, and they start moving into more finance, business acumen, leadership, soft skills. At some point in your career, you basically trade your IQ for your EQ or your emotional intelligence. And because what happens initially is about what you can do by yourself. And as your career progresses, especially in architecture careers, it's what your team can do, not what you can do. How do I suggest you prepare for the behavior-based questions, as they can be quite varied? Well, if you really think about them, they're not really varied. So what are we really trying to ask here? What's the goal of the questions that we're actually asking? Well, we want to see how you behave in a certain situation. So let's talk about some things that I can ask you for. If I ask you about your strengths and your weaknesses, I'm not looking for I have no weaknesses. I'm trying to see who you are. And there's some weaknesses that I can contend with. And there's other weaknesses that I can't. And I'll give you an example. What are your strengths? Well, I have an expertise in this, whatever it may be. I am incredibly motivated and I will do whatever it takes to be great at something. I have more energy and focus and I never leave until I'm finished. Those kind of things are strengths that people might look for. Now let's talk about a showstopper weakness. Okay, what's your weaknesses? I'm lazy. Okay, interview's over. And they're looking for people to talk about that as a weakness. But we all have varying degrees of weakness. For example, I can tell you right now, I am not Mr. Organized. I mean, at all. My wife is Mrs. Organized. She's got notes and charts for everything. That is so not me. So if someone asked me what my weaknesses were, I could say truthfully, I'm not the most organized person in the world. But to make sure that didn't hurt me in my career, here's what I actually do. One is I create a checklist of all the things that need to be done, and I have it in prioritized order. And I make sure that I get through all the high priority things long before they're due by organizing my thoughts ahead of time. And that way I don't miss anything. Now I said I've got a weakness, but I showed my mitigation to that weakness. So there's that. Now, what are we looking for? The one type of question we're asking for is, how do you deal with conflict? So have some type of example of various kinds of conflict that you've dealt with. If you had a conflict at work versus a conflict with a family member, how did you deal with it? Were you able to have a conversation with them and use an empathetic approach to get things from their perspective and have a good thing? That's great. If you can do it, awesome. Were you able to find the individual's actual challenge and solve their challenge and then develop an enhanced relationship? Fine. So we're looking for that. Was it a person that needed a little training and you found the knowledge gap and you trained them? Again, you were a solution provider. Did you go the first thing you do is go to the person's manager and complain about them? Or your best friend and complain about your wife? So that's what they're looking for in many cases. What do you deal with conflict? They may also be asking you, how do you deal with specific challenges? And what are they really asking? Did you fly off the handle and you're going to do that again? Did you approach it calmly? Did you go out there and reach out to people and communicate with people, and in the process of talking to people, get your solution or get others' inputs? Because all of them shows me various things. If you flew off the handle and had a temper tantrum, I don't want you as part of my business because I don't want to create an animosity in my team. Now, if you went in there and created an environment where you built a team and you discussed it, now I'm getting excited. And why am I getting excited? Because now I know that you're going to go out there and build teams dynamically and build relationships, and you can solve problems, and that's the solution provider I want. But there's also other effective ways to do it. So that's really what I'm trying to get to. So I would say, look at what we're trying to do in a behavior question. We want to see how you're going to think. So if you think about the various challenges you've had in your career, you'll be able to think about all of it. What was the challenge about getting a project done on time? What was the time you had a disagreement with a coworker? What was the time you had a disagreement with the manager? They're almost the same question. What was the challenge and what you did about it? So I'd say peel back the onion and start looking for what they're really asking as opposed to the words, the actual question. Now, typically speaking, when you answer this, you have to have an intelligent framing response. Now, I'm not saying you have to use the STAR method where you describe it exactly in that, but find a way to frame it. Frame it where you give me the information about what was really the challenge, and then tell me what you did about it and how you got it better. You can use STAR, you can use any format you want, but that's really the heart of what we're actually looking for. Hope that helps, and I'm happy to ask another deeper question if I need to give more. What should a cloud security architect's resume look like? Well, here's what I would do. So if I've got a cloud architect, we're talking about designing enterprise-wide technology systems, right? If I've got a cloud security architect, I have things like designing an organization's end-to-end security strategy. A cloud security architect would have things like creating security policies. A cloud architect would be coordinating the enterprise security with are developing the enterprise security strategy by collaborating with various industry vendors for network security, data loss prevention, security event monitoring, and authentication systems, for example, because you're going to be dealing with a lot of different organizations' things. You could be talking about designing the organization's demilitarized zones for various types of applications. You could be talking about designing the organization's network security strategy, inclusive of route filtering, for example, if that was something that would be used, access control OS, firewalls, IDS, IPS systems, those kinds of things. You might talk about quantifying assets and risk management strategies, which is definitely something you'd be doing. Finding an organization's assets, looking about their risks. You would be creating security architecture documentation. You would be leading security architecture teams. You would be giving presentations to stakeholders. You would be coming up with security standards and best practices. For example, what level of patching does an operating system, what level of host-based IDS, IPS systems need to be there, that kind of thing. You might be working with an IAM architect to get involved in IAM strategies. What type of SSO, single sign-on systems you're using, federated identity and access management strategies, what type of token-based systems are you using, biometric authentication systems, etc. What kind of, so these would be the kind of things that I would see on a security architect strategy. Developing risk mitigation plans, developing incident response plans. Okay, if a company has been hacked or is under an attack, which people need to mitigate the attack from which departments? Who speaks to the press? Who speaks to regulatory bodies? What lawyers need to be called? What executives need to be there to drive that? These are the kind of things we do as cloud security architects. Good question there, Prab. If there are any others, I am happy to answer them. Otherwise, I just finished 15 minutes early, and that never happens. So I'll give you a few minutes to see if there's any questions. And if not, I'm actually go back to Philby content. Okay, well, if there are no questions, and I know there's a 60 to 80 second delay, so I'll go over some things and see if they come in. But if there are no questions, I'd like to, so Manny is asking this first. Okay, there are questions. So Manny says, are the classes cross-functional? Every class we teach has to be cross-functional, because if we're teaching people to be architects, they have to be able to sell the solution, present the solution to the key stakeholders. They have to be able to design the solution in the first place. They have to be able to build a business case on that solution. They have to collaborate with data architects, security architects, IAM architects, network architects, big data architects. So of course, when we train cross-functional teams. We train it exactly the way you would actually train an architect. And our students do everything a real architect does, and they even get an internship with us that they can use as experience. And quite frankly, this week, I'm already providing, when somebody gets hired and they send the reference in and I talk about what they do and how long they've been for us, I'm already doing it this week. So yes, they're very cross-functional. What about a cloud enterprise resume? So, Steph, maybe let me think about it this way. So the whole point of an enterprise architect is the people, processes, and technology. The whole part of the cloud architect is focused on the cloud, public cloud or private cloud, and everything that goes on the cloud. So by nature, a cloud architect is not an enterprise architect. So anytime we pick one platform, we lose the enterprise architect. Now, if I was going to train a cloud enterprise architect like the way I do, what I'm really doing is I'm training a cloud architect. And then I realized that if you're going to be a really great cloud architect, you actually have to be able to understand the private clouds, the public clouds, the data centers, and all the applications. And then what I do is I bolt on business process reengineering training and enterprise architecture training and business acumen training and everything. And by doing it together, I give my cloud architects the knowledge how to do the enterprise architect job. And because we teach every cloud architect here, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, private cloud, and hybrid multi-cloud, I've already had the fundamentals of a cloud enterprise architect. But generally speaking, enterprise means closer to the business. And cloud is sort of there. So if you're going to look at it as a solution architect, think 60-40, 60% business, 40% tech. If you're looking for someone that's actually going to cloud architect, think 60 to 70% business and 30 to 40% tech. You're thinking enterprise architect, you're really 80+% tech. So hope that helps out. Is there some Mufsa says, is CISSP training including in the cloud architect program? Yes. All of our cloud programs have a CISSP. That is our minimum level of security training. And that is our recommended certification, because when we use it, people get an incredible number of interviews. And because we go so deep into security, networking, and cloud in our program compared to other people, yeah, we love that. It gets people interviews, and then our students tend to do very well. So yes, we include that in our cloud architect program. Is there a fast track for someone with an IT background, Cisco background, and AWS DevOps? So tell me what you've done with your Cisco background. And what I'll tell you is the AWS DevOps training has absolutely zero to do with architecture. So that is not related to anything related to do. So let's talk about what you've done with an IT background. So if you've been designing networks for organizations, and what I mean by designing networks is meeting with their C-suite, finding their business goals, their business pain points, and their business challenges. At that point, understanding the way their business operates and understanding their traffic needs, their performance needs, and understanding their systems. If you're in that type of a perception, so if you're in, let's say, in that kind of a position where you're doing this, where you're now designing a routing plan for, say, 20 to 30,000 remote locations in the IP addressing plan and where you're going to route aggregate, guess what? You've already been an architect, and all you need to learn, if you've been doing that, is the cloud piece. And what is the cloud piece? The load balancers, the servers, the server virtualization, the containers, the container orchestration, the storage area networks, and the security. Yes, that's easy for you to learn. And if by IT background, you mean like a CCIE where that was your intro to networking, and then you got some years, yeah, you can do that in 3 or 4 months. I've got lots of CCIEs that was their baseline in networking, that was their intro to networking, and then they learned, and then poof, it was easy. Now you have to understand these are the kind of things we do as architects, and I want to read you the things we do so you see that the DevOps doesn't have anything related to it. But if you've been in that role, you're there. But let's assume you've been a network engineer and you've not been the engineer that's doing system design, and you're not presenting with the C-suite, and you're not leading teams. Then what you have to do is you have to take the experience you have, which is great, and then ultimately what you have to do is then fill in the new skills. So let me tell you about the kind of things we do as cloud architects. And that's why I'm telling you that stay away from DevOps, stay away from coding, stay away from SysOps, stay away from Linux. So as a cloud architect, we don't touch the technology. We design strategies, we present them, then we sell them. We do things like create technology roadmaps and align those technology roadmaps with an organization's business objectives. We'll be analyzing the current systems and infrastructure. We'll be looking for areas of improvement that we can provide in, say, IT processes and systems. We'll be designing future state architecture models where they want to be in the future. We may be looking at any type of transition architecture between what they have now and where they need to go, intermediate architectures. For example, if I was going to design an IP video solution for a large enterprise and they needed telepresence solutions, I'd have to see, do they have the bandwidth on their network? Can their routers handle it? Can we put a QoS on their systems and we own it? What's the capacity there? And we might need a new network before we went there. We'll be evaluating about emerging technologies for potential adoption. We'll be collaborating with stakeholders to understand their business requirements. We'll be aligning IT initiatives with business strategy. We'll be creating architecture documentation. We'll be doing a lot of gap analysis between future goals and future system need and current system need. We'll be we'll be overseeing system integration efforts and getting all the people talking to each other that we need to. We'll be developing and enforcing architecture standards and best practices. We'll be doing impact analysis of various technology platforms. We'll be looking to optimize their IT resource allocation. We may be leading architectural review boards or facilitating communication between IT and business units. We may be designing enterprise data models. We'll be looking for design for scalability, flexibility, agility. We'll be conducting technology audits. We'll be managing vendors. We'll be managing stakeholders, developing disaster recovery plans, designing statements of work, responding to RFIs, RFPs, RFQs. So if you know how to do that stuff, great. If not, it takes me about 8 to 12 months to train someone to be an architect, and that's assuming they have no background. And I'll give you some examples. So people, like Ivan Tamba, for example, hired by AWS as his first tech job. Jordan Kitko, again, hired by AWS as his first tech job after our training. Richard Ferrara, hired by MUFG Bank as a security architect straight after our training. Lenny was our video editor, had his first solutions architect job. And then I have other people that, for example, have been engineers for a long time. And engineers bring with them some of the best actual technology experience. But remember, our focus is doing technology audits and participating in strategic planning sessions and facilitating meetings and those types of things. So if you've got that, great, you're ready to go. If not, you're going to need to train with someone like us or someone that can teach architecture. Architecture is not DevOps. Architecture is not coding. Architecture is not touching the technology. Architecture is about finding an organization's business needs and looking for creative solutions to solve them. I hope that actually helps. But I've got a lot of track record with my CCIAs, getting them hired relatively quickly. Mike, all the jobs I see need experience. How can you get a job without experience? Helen, every job in the world needs experience. If I want to hire someone to work as a waiter or a food server in my restaurant, I want 5 years experience. If I want to hire someone to be a front desk clerk in a hotel, I want 5 years experience. If I want a cloud admin, I want 5 years experience. And there's no cloud admin jobs. If I want a junior sysadmin, I want 5 years experience. If I want a help desk employee, I want 5 years experience. Helen, what am I really looking for? I don't want someone with a CompTIA A+, Net+, and Security+. That's what it's really about. You don't have to worry about it. So, Helen, I'll give you examples. Jennifer E., hired by JP Morgan Chase as a solution architect. Last job, mental health tech. Jermaine, last job, selling landscaping gear. Hired as an enterprise architect. Balwinder, hired by Microsoft as a solutions architect. Daniel Bosey, you saw on our YouTube channel, high school dropout. Didn't even graduate high school, and JP Morgan Chase hired him. But boy, is he's wicked smart. I will tell you, Jeffrey, he went to Kalian. His last job was in some form of geology, nothing related to it. Here's some other people I haven't mentioned today. Debbie G over in England, she got hired by Credera. She had about 14 certifications before we found her, and then after that we fixed her, got her hired pretty quickly. Al over at Deloitte's first job as a senior solution architect. Wallace Agano at JP Morgan Chase, first job in enterprise architect. Nafuli over in Manchester, England, first job is a chief technology officer. So here's the thing. Nobody cares about your job descriptions except for the people that made the nonsense job description in the first place. Tyrone, do you have access to the Ethan, one of the VPs at Amazon that wrote the same thing that I've been talking about every last week? And he talked about job descriptions being completely meaningless and how they actually have nothing related to do to the job, that these job descriptions are being written by people in HR and finance that have no idea. So how do you get a job, Helen? You go on an interview. And I bet you'll find so many people that have been on interviews. And guess what? If somebody brought you on an interview, unless it's a courtesy interview, if they brought you on an interview, it's because the hiring manager has been willing to hire you. If the person doesn't get hired, it's related to their skills. And I can tell you, most people that come to us, they've been on 10 interviews, 15 interviews, and they never got hired. And I give them a major, and they said, why am I going to get hired? They're on a webinar, and I asked them some basic architecture questions, and they're like, no. That's not our skills. So they don't have it, and then they train them and they instantly get hired. So you have to have the right skills. You have to know out there to find a recruiter that's going to position you to the hiring manager so you don't apply for the job. Or you got to be meticulous. If you look at Ivan Tambo, and he was on our YouTube channel, here's what he did. When Ivan Tambo was our student working as a waiter, he talked about literally writing an email to 86 different recruiters at Amazon, talking about his energy, his enthusiasm, his passion, his willingness to work and to go above and beyond. Guess what? They brought him in an interview and they loved him. So the key is you can do anything you want. You have to have the skills, Helen. You have to have the skills. You got to go out there and build your brand. You got to show people why they should hire you. Are you showing that you're an architect in the social media things you do? Great. Or are you making a WordPress website showing people you know how to make a WordPress website, but you don't know business strategy? You go out there, you create the right content, people will come to you, Helen. I can't even make a LinkedIn post and not get a job offer if I'm not careful. And my students have the same issue when they make the right LinkedIn post. People reach out to them. But you got to have the right skills. You got to have the right training. And that's why I created what we did. But no matter what, you have to have the skills for the job. Dingelman. Arbitrage engineers in other countries cost 25% of American engineers. You are correct. Why not just hire 100% overseas engineers? Dingelman, here's the reason why. I know which company you actually work for, and I know you work for a company that's big upon teams. So if anybody's ever had a massive problem they're trying to solve, and I'll give you examples. In most of my life, the architectures I worked on were something nobody's ever done before. Mike, figure out in order how to get voice, data, and video to 50,000 homes in the Middle East in the year 2000. All on a single converged network. And at that point, we're talking to video encoder people, and we're talking to middleware people that are creating set-top boxes, and I'm there as an IP multicast expert, and then we're trying to figure out fully programmable ASICs that can forward and replicate multicast packets. And that kind of stuff, when you run into it, here's what we did. You get everybody into a giant room, and you got the people that are writing the BGP code. You've got a BGP expert, you got this expert, you got this expert, and they're all in the room, and you're whiteboarding stuff, and you don't leave the room until it's done. Now you're dealing with things. So there's that. So that in-person experience of go in their culture and innovate means a whole lot, and that's why companies are willing to pay more to have local. The other part of it is, generally speaking, when you deal overseas, there's typically some productivity losses. Now, I'll explain that. You can find just as good, if not a better programmer in India than you can in the United States, for example. I'm just using that as an example. The challenge is now you've got a manager that's potentially in the United States, managing a manager that's in another part of the world, that's managing another set of people. And with that, it often gets critical. So in these particular situations, there's an expected loss of productivity hiring overseas, and that's why people pay a little more. The other side of it, Dingelman, is not everything can be exported overseas. There are certain things that I've worked on that have to be done domestically in America, stored in America. There's some types of things that we can't ship overseas for security reasons. And sometimes it's also for copyright reasons. Some parts of the world are not as good as copyright as other parts of the world. So there can be a lot of these factors. But architects, every kind of AI and technology creates more architect jobs, because every time there's a new technology, there's a new opportunity to make it great, or there's a new technology to just deploy it and hurt your business. That's why architects keep getting from these things. But Dingelman, I think businesses are at the point where they're thinking, why don't I put 50% of our people overseas for engineers? And why not use AI and keep the best engineers here and pay them any amount of money they want if you have the best? Because there are some engineers that are so good, it's worth paying them $500,000 or $600,000 or $700,000 a year, especially if you can get them in the room together. Then you can outsource those mid-tier engineering positions overseas, and the junior stuff you can use AI. So these are the things businesses are talking about every day. You go to a business, they're always exploring these kinds of challenges. But right now, if it really matters and you can get in the room and you can get the best of the best in a room and they're local and you can mitigate any barriers and time zones and communication and things, sometimes that gets great. And sometimes it's a national security thing too. Hope that helps. What are key considerations for hiring a FinOps professional? And what should candidates expect during an interview? So, Gabriel, if we look at FinOps, let's look at what it really is and how FinOps came about. The majority of the cloud architectures designed were so bad that on average, companies are paying 250 to 300% more on the cloud than they were for the same workloads as before. Those are David Lethicum numbers, and they seem right. So because the architectures were bad, now the company are saying, what do we do? And here's FinOps. So the first thing that I want is to mitigate the need for FinOps and hire less FinOps people by hiring better architects. Because I used to practice medicine, and here's two approaches in medicine, Gabriel, just to think about. In one case, I've got a patient, they come to me when they're 30 years old, they're 35 pounds overweight, and they smoke. I take that patient that's 35 pounds overweight, I put them on a medically managed weight loss program, I set them up with a trainer, they exercise now 4 times a week, and they're eating good, they lose weight, and they stop smoking. Now, I keep that person as my patient, and when that patient's 85 or 90, he gets his first heart attack and dies around the time he was supposed to. The alternative is I have that same patient that came to me 30 pounds overweight that's smoking. I ignore their cigarette smoking. I ignore their being overweight. A year later, they're 60 pounds overweight and they have high blood pressure. 3 years later, they have diabetes and high blood pressure. They're 120 pounds overweight. And then they get a heart attack 5 years later. And then what do? I send them to the cardiologist and they get angioplasty or open heart surgery, and now they're better. FinOps is sending them to the cardiovascular surgeon or the interventional cardiologist to fix the problem because the architect or the internal medicine physician didn't manage their care in the first place. So knowing that and knowing that's where FinOps came from, Gabriel, now let's talk about FinOps itself. The whole point in FinOps is I need somebody that understands business acumen again. Now, if I've got a FinOps professional that can't communicate their needs and get us to do anything about it, that's not going to work. So now my FinOps professional is going to need communication skills and leadership skills and the ability to sell it to me. I also need my FinOps people to understand the types of technologies that actually exist and what the competitive offerings are. Because let's say I put a virtual machine on a cloud. I'll give you an example, Gabriel. I can go right now and buy a server from Dell for about 300 grand. And over the course of a few years, it's going to cost about $5 million on the cloud versus $300,000 for me to buy it. I need to look at, was moving that server to the cloud the right thing to do? Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. Maybe take those workloads that literally will be 10 times cheaper in the data center and move them to the data center. And maybe take those variable workloads in the cloud and things that are more agile related to auto scaling and things and put them in the cloud because they're going to be a lot cheaper. So if you understand how to communicate with the architects and you can speak with the business leaders and you can speak with the CIO and you can speak to the CTO and you have the ability to get information from the CFO, now you're not just a FinOps professional, you're an executive. So I don't really train FinOps. It is not my area of expertise. I'm more about fixing the architecture first because that's the biggest issue, and then finding FinOps and or accounting kind of people to help find the inefficiencies. I love it. It's great. But that's what I'd be looking for. And that's what people are looking for is not, do they understand what they could fix? And do they understand the impact of that on the business? Hope that helps. So I'd expect a lot of business acumen questions. Do I work with the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force? Yes, I've done work with that in my youth. Do I work with the Institute of Engineering and Technology? Not really. I am an architect, so I typically stay away from engineering and focus more on architecture. Engineering is how to. Architecture is what business benefits are we going to divide. So I try to make sure that all my education is focused directly on my career, and the work that I do is focused more on my career. I know some wonderful, distinguished engineers, the kind that are making patents and things that work with all these kind of great engineering organizations. And I go to those engineers when I need that level. But the work that I do is typically done with more architecture side. So it's more business, it's more consulting, it's more strategy. Good question, though. Pablo, for someone like you who comes from an auto engineering background, mastering audio repair, and restoration, how do these skills translate if you want to go into cloud architecture? So it all depends on what you're actually doing with audio engineering. And here's what I mean. If you are, let's say, doing live events and going into a live event, you have to go in there and figure out where the event's going to be and how big the auditorium is, and the type of sound and levels of sound that you need at various levels. If you're thinking of the acoustics of this environment and you're thinking of all the technology that needs to be there, from the microphones to the mixers to all this other stuff that goes back, I don't know enough about it. Yeah, you're already halfway there. Because now you're actually planning the concert. And I have a friend, Douglas, who's a master at these kinds of things, does all these big live events, major conferences, and he's a rock star. And there's lots of IP audio and video solutions that we can deal with in this world. In fact, I built a career doing on IP video with IP multicast earlier in my career. So there's that. Mastering audio, I don't really know what goes into that. If you're talking taking that and aligning tracks, that kind of thing, that's more on the engineering thing. Now, the audio repair and restoration, that could be interesting to me. So what are we talking about? If we're talking about soldering and wiring, no, completely different set of skills. But if we're talking about taking a system and understanding what's actually going into the system and understanding where the problem is and then fixing it, that could be there. So here's what I mean. Let's say right now, let's say my audio is not as good as it could be. And I'm sure it's not. I need to get my friend Douglas coming here. And what could it be? So could it be the microphone setting over here? Probably. I might not have one of these dials on my SM7B done properly. Could it be the cloud lifter? Maybe. Could it be the audio input in the camera and the gain in my camera, which is then going into a video encoder, which is then coming into broadcasting software? And you would know where to look and tune and all those things. Yeah, that's thinking like an architect. Definitely thinking like an architect. And that will be there. Now, what if an audio engineer, you're actually walking to a client and you're selling jobs to the client and you're saying, here's what I'm going to bid for this, and you bring in a team for people, and now you're even more like an architect. Are you giving presentations? Are you doing training on various solutions to people? Again, that's an architect thing. Are you creating any documentation around the solutions you're doing? I would take those. And I would talk about each and every one of those skills. I don't know what your skills are, but I can tell you this. If you want to join us on our How to Get Your First Architect Job webinar, I will tell you the first thing that I would do with that is you can ask me questions live and I'll interview you right then and there, and I'll tell you how to position, and I would be honored to do so. Tyrone, we can go to the next one. Yeah, I agree. Lots of companies with critical infrastructure aren't allowed to offshore. 100% agree with you. I think we actually talked about that too. SDOS, the most dangerous question. When it comes to cloud training and cloud providers, would you say it's best to master one provider's training and then spreading to the rest? No. In fact, I will tell you SDO, and I actually surveyed about 1,000 AWS certified people before I tried to create this course. And these were people with 1 to 6 AWS certifications. And I asked them basic questions. Could you explain to me what is an EC2 instance? Could you explain to me how block storage works or object storage and when they should be used? Could you tell me how to secure your demilitarized zone? Could you tell me what kind of a database you would use for these various circumstances? Could you tell me why I might want to set up a streaming data pipeline and what it could do for my business? Could you talk to me about the mapping and reduction process necessary to create a data lake? Could you talk to me about when I would use a virtual machine versus a container? Could you tell me anything related to computing? Not a single answer unless they already had another job. And here's the reason why. If you take the AWS Solutions Architect Professional, here's what you will learn. The name of all the AWS stuff, which you can never use with your customer. So I can't walk into my chief information officer and talk about S3. I can talk about object storage, but not S3. You will also learn how to configure a bunch of proprietary things. Do you know what I'm not going to do on my cloud architect job? Ever touch the technology. So I don't need to worry about configuring it. But what you won't learn is design, and what will be hidden from the cloud providers training is all the underlying infrastructure, which is the thing that matters most to you. Now, if you learn the cloud instead of wasting your time trying to learn a service provider's names, and you actually learn virtual machines, and you actually learn containers and container orchestration, and you actually learn networking, and you actually learn BGP, and you actually learn how to build an IP addressing plan, and you actually learn when to use relational databases versus no SQL databases versus data warehouse. If you had an understanding into business intelligence tools and real-time streaming and now analytics tools and what they do for the business, and you understood how to secure things and where to use firewalls, IDS, IPS systems, I can employ you anywhere. So actually, the worst thing I've actually seen is someone get certified in the cloud and they still don't know cloud computing. Here's what you need to do instead. Learn the cloud. And that's what I do. If you see the way I train people, the first thing I do is an intro to cloud computing. And then I dive deep into every component that makes the cloud possible. And that way, if you're at a meeting and they say we use Azure virtual machines, you're going to say, okay. Same as a Google Compute Engine instance. Same as an Oracle virtual machine. Same thing as an AWS EC2 instance. Same thing as I have in my Nutanix cloud or my OpenStack cloud. Then you can work anywhere. And you actually will know the cloud. And then when you know the cloud, passing an exam like the Google Professional Cloud Architect is about 2 days' work. Because all you had to do is learn their silly vocabulary things, because there's no cloud training in this training. It's just engineering hands-on. And it's not even engineering. It's admin level training, technician training. So no, I would learn the cloud. And because if you learn how to drive a car, which is what I did, I learned how to drive a car. I went over to my uncle's house. He was a Marine. He retired from the Marines and he was selling cars. And one day he had me in one car. And the next day he had me in another car. And the first time I got into the second car, SDO, I looked and went, this is a big Cadillac. I was a little scared to drive it. And I said, I don't know. And he said, Mike, it's a car. I'm like, but it's big. I don't know how to drive it. And he said, Mike, steering wheel, turn signals, accelerator, brake. And I looked at him and he said, adapt, improvise, and overcome. And then poof, I just drove the car and realized it was no big deal. And then another time he had a different car at his house and I learned to drive on that car. And then when I bought my first car, it was a Nissan. And you know what? I didn't go to training to drive the Nissan because I knew how to drive any car. So SDO, they don't train doctors. They don't send them to Pfizer training so they can only learn how to prescribe Pfizer drugs. They send physicians to medical school so they can learn what patients to treat and how to diagnose us. And that way, if it's a Pfizer drug, if it's a Merck drug, if it's an Eli Lilly drug, it doesn't matter because you know. So what I'd say, learn the cloud, then learn any provider of your choice. But you're not going to be able to do anything with just knowing one cloud. 98% of enterprises are multi-cloud, which means somebody that only knows one cloud is worthless to me hiring. Not that they're worthless as a person, but their skill is worthless to me. Because in 9.8 out of 10 times, I need them to know more than one cloud, which means I need them to know the cloud versus a cloud. I hope that works. And in 89% of all businesses, it's multi-cloud. So if I've got someone that didn't learn the cloud and they want to come up with me with a DynamoDB, Amazon Aurora ECS solution, and they don't know that I can't use it because it doesn't work multi-cloud because they didn't learn the cloud first. It's a very nice to meet you. Have a nice day. Polite conversation, courtesy interview. So I kind of hope that helps. So learn the cloud. You learn the cloud, you can do anything. And that's why it wasn't like in the old days when we did our CCIEs and we learned networking. The BGP that I learned for the CCIE, the day after I passed my CCIE, I was working on Juniper Networks routers, and I didn't have to learn anything to do it. I picked up their configuration guide, and I knew whether I was prepending in AS or changing the origin code or changing the local preference of weight. I already knew it because I knew BGP. And the CCIE, it would be OSPF. It would be the same OSPF that would work everywhere. But since the cloud providers don't tell you the underlying technology or even what the technology is, only the name of it, no, the last thing you need to do is learn the cloud provider. The first thing you need to do is learn the cloud. Hope that makes sense. Okay, I don't know how I did it, but we got a lot more questions before we were leaving, and I ran a little late today. So it was an honor to spend the information with you. Maybe you can give me a hashtag Cloud Architect technical interview or a hashtag Solutions Architect interview. And that way I know that you're here. If you've enjoyed the video, maybe give it a like. Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to be notified of new videos to help you in your career. And please, by all means, hope to see you in one of our free webinars. It's live on Zoom, and I love meeting people. Take care, everyone.